Madam Speaker, or rather former Madam Speaker, forgive me, but could you recall the year you first assumed the speakership? The voice moved with a slow and gentle cadence. That distinct Louisiana accent turned the moment into a porch-side chat instead of a Senate interrogation. Senator John Kennedy reclined in his seat, with reading spectacles balanced on his nose-tip. He gazed over the rims at Nancy Pelosi like a grandfather waiting for a child to recall a simple fact. Silence filled the room, but it was not the quiet of deep contemplation. It was not the pause of a politician weighing the risks of an answer. It was a hollow and empty silence. It was the quiet struggle of searching for a memory that should be easily accessible, but is missing. Nancy Pelosi sat at the witness table flanked by two attorneys in high-priced suits. She stared at Senator Kennedy as if he had requested she solve a complex math problem mentally. Her mouth parted slightly, then shut, and then opened once more. The C-SPAN cameras remained fixed tightly on her expression. Every major cable news network had interrupted regular programming to broadcast this oversight hearing live. What was billed as standard political theater regarding congressional ethics had suddenly shifted in tone. Something about Pelosi's current appearance, including the blank look in her eyes and the confusion on her brow, signaled a change. 10 seconds ticked by, and then 15 passed. The silence grew heavy and uncomfortable. I believe that was when we reclaimed the House from the Republicans after she began, but trailed off. She was grasping for the answer like trying to recall a password typed thousands of times that has suddenly vanished. Kennedy's voice stayed soft and nearly kind as he spoke. It was 2007. Ma'am, you became Speaker in January of 2007, which was 17 years ago. Do you recall that specific time? Pelosi's face turned a shade of pink. Naturally, I remember that I was just pausing to think. Then, what year did you become Speaker for the second term? Another pause occurred, and this one lasted even longer. Her attorneys shifted their weight uneasily in their chairs. One lawyer leaned in to whisper a prompt, but Kennedy raised his hand to stop him. I would prefer, Mrs. Pelosi answer from her own recollection, if you do not mind. The attorney retreated, and Pelosi stared down at the table before her. I believe it was 2019. Yes, it was definitely 2019. Correct, ma'am. It was 2019, and you served until January of this year when the new Congress arrived. So you held the speakership twice for roughly 12 years total, which is one of the most powerful roles in government. You stood third in the line of succession for the presidency. You possessed access to top-secret intelligence briefings. You cast votes on war authorizations. You controlled exactly which legislation reached the floor. Do you remember that period of time well? Of course I do. Kennedy lifted a document from the pile arranged before him. Good. Then surely you will remember the stock trades, so let me ask about those. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paper. March 15, 2020 was a Sunday right in the midst of the early COVID panic. Do you recall that specific day? Silence followed again. Ma'am, do you remember March 15, 2020? Pelosi spoke in a quiet voice, saying, I remember it was during COVID. Yes, on that day, you and your husband, Paul, bought $5 million in call options for Pfizer stock. These were call options that would pay out only if Pfizer's stock price went up. Do you recall making that trade? Mrs. Pelosi, do you remember purchasing $5 million in Pfizer options? My husband handles our investments, and I do not involve myself in daily operations. But you signed the financial disclosure form. Kennedy held up a paper and said, This is your signature right here at the bottom. He displayed it so the cameras could capture the image. Her signature was projected clearly on the screen behind her. Pelosi stared at the image. There was no sign of recognition in her eyes. She looked at her own signature as if it belonged to a stranger. "Do you remember signing this form, ma'am?" "I sign many documents." This particular one disclosed a $5 million trade made the day before the House voted on the CARES Act. That was the first major COVID relief bill totaling $2 trillion. You were Speaker, and you led those negotiations. The day before the vote, your family invested $5 million in a pharmaceutical company poised to benefit from pandemic funding. You do not remember that. She did not provide an answer. Kennedy leaned forward slightly in his chair. His voice remained soft, with that gentle drawl, but now it held something else. There was concern, real concern in his tone. "Mrs. Pelosi, do you know what day it is today?" She looked up at him, then at her lawyers, and back to Kennedy. Everyone present, including senators and staffers and the millions watching on television, saw the same reality. She did not know. She genuinely did not know what day it was. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered into her ear. She nodded slightly and said, "Thursday. Your lawyer just told you that," Kennedy stated quietly. "Did you know it was Thursday before he told you?" A long and terrible silence followed. "What is the date, ma'am?" Another pause occurred, and she looked lost. "January 22nd, her lawyer whispered. "January 22nd, Pelosi repeated. Kennedy sat back in his chair, looking sad. "Mrs. Pelosi, I have to ask if you are currently under a doctor's care for memory problems." That was when everyone watching realized the true nature of this hearing. It was not just about stock trades. It was about whether Nancy Pelosi, one of the most powerful politicians in history, had been making decisions for millions, while her memory failed. The silence following that question lasted 20 seconds. It felt like 20 years. She did not answer because she could not answer. In that moment, 50 years of political power ended, not with a scandal, but with a simple question about the day. 4 hours earlier, the scene had been very different. It was Thursday morning, on January 22, 2026. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room in the Hart Office building was filling with reporters and cameras. The formal atmosphere of dark wood and brass gave everything a sense of weight. This was the place where careers died and scandals were exposed. The hearing was called after an investigation exposed a pattern of suspicious stock trades by Congress members. The headlines had been damning regarding inside traders in Congress. Nancy Pelosi's trades featured prominently with charts aligning her husband's purchases against major legislation. The pattern was impossible to ignore. They bought pharmaceutical stocks before pandemic funding and tech stocks before beneficial bills. They sold defense stocks right before bad news broke about contracts. This happened over and over again. The total profit during her speakership was $140 million on a congressional salary. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted to hold hearings and subpoenaed Nancy Pelosi. She was no longer Speaker, as Republicans had taken the House, but she was still a sitting member. She had no choice but to appear at 9:45 that morning. Nancy Pelosi was 85 years old, though she never admitted it. She had been in Congress for 38 years and Speaker twice. She had stared down presidents and survived countless scandals while wielding power with an iron fist. She entered the room flanked by lawyers from a high-end firm carrying expensive briefcases. Her chief of staff walked behind them, with communication staffers ready to spin the narrative. Pelosi wore a perfectly tailored purple suit. Her signature oversized sunglasses came off to reveal a face familiar to everyone. Her hair was styled perfectly, and her jewelry likely cost 6 figures. She looked imperious and untouchable, as if she had done this 1,000 times. What she did not look was worried. That lack of worry was her first mistake. She took her seat at the witness table while her lawyers arranged papers. They projected confidence, thinking this was just another hearing. The plan was to answer vaguely and run out the clock. What Nancy Pelosi did not know was that John Kennedy had spent weeks preparing. He was not just prepared on the stock trades. He was focused on something else entirely. 3 weeks earlier, his chief of staff had brought him a thick folder. "Sir, you asked me to pull every public appearance Pelosi made in the last 3 years." John Kennedy looked up from the budget document he was reading. He was 73 years old, but looked younger and sharp. His folksy demeanor made people underestimate him constantly. His resume told a different story, including Oxford and a law career. He was never quite what he seemed. Kennedy asked what had been found. His chief of staff dropped the folder on the desk. It was 3 inches thick with video transcripts and interview clips. Kennedy opened it and started reading immediately. Within 5 minutes, he was taking notes. An interview from June 2024 showed Pelosi referring to Trump as President Bush repeatedly. During a speech in August 2024, she repeated the exact same sentence 4 times like a skipping record. In September, she confused the name of her own committee assignment. A deposition transcript showed her answering that she did not recall 76 times. Kennedy looked up, realizing this was more than old age. The pattern was accelerating and getting worse. "Has anyone raised this publicly?" he asked. "Not really beyond some internet speculation," his staffer replied. Mainstream media would not touch it because she was still too powerful. Kennedy leaned back in his chair and was quiet. Pull her financial disclosures and every stock trade her husband made while she was Speaker. I want dates and amounts cross-referenced with classified briefings. Do you think the stock trading connects to the cognitive issues? Asked the staffer. I think if she cannot remember becoming Speaker, she cannot remember signing off on $5 million trades. Someone else was likely making decisions while she was too impaired to notice. That is a serious allegation, the staffer noted. It is not an allegation. It is a question I will ask on live television. We are going to watch her try to answer. They spent 2 weeks building a narrative case. It was a pattern of perfectly timed trades followed by confused public statements. By the time they finished, Kennedy had a 30-page binder. He was not going to ambush her with secret information. He was going to ask her to remember things she should know. Now, at 10:00 a.m. on January 22nd, the hearing was called to order. The chairman brought the room to silence. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on ethics violations will now come to order. He read through the formalities and the witness list. Nancy Pelosi was the star attraction, despite other experts being present. The ranking member gave a 5-minute opening statement defending Pelosi. A Republican senator then gave a statement attacking her. It was standard partisan theater where nobody's mind would change. Then it was Kennedy's turn. He stood up slowly and shuffled some papers intentionally. The shuffling made him seem disorganized and harmless. Mr. Chairman, I do not have a long speech prepared. I just want to ask the witness some questions to get facts on the record. He turned to look at Pelosi. She looked back with a slightly condescending expression she had perfected. Kennedy smiled slightly and apologized for calling her Speaker. Congresswoman is fine, she said with a clipped voice. Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate your time today. He sat down and arranged his papers carefully. The slowness was calculated to build tension. Now I want to ask you about some stock trades. First, can you tell me when you first became a member of Congress? It was a simple question that should be automatic. I was first elected in 1987, Pelosi said. Thank you. And when did you become Speaker of the House? That was where the trouble started. Pelosi paused for 2 seconds, which was too long for an automatic answer. That was when we took back the House, she said, searching. Everyone could see her eyes had a distant look. Kennedy waited without interrupting. 2007, she finally said with uncertainty in her voice. Yes, ma'am, January 2007, Kennedy confirmed gently. You served as Speaker until 2011 when Republicans took the majority. Then you were Minority Leader for 8 years. You became Speaker again in 2019 after Democrats took back the House. Is that timeline correct? Yes, that is correct. So you were Speaker for 12 years total and one of the most powerful people in government. Do you remember that time clearly? Of course I do. Good. Then let us talk about some decisions you made. Kennedy adjusted his reading glasses. Mrs. Pelosi, I want to establish that your memory of your leadership is accurate. I'm going to ask you some basic questions involving facts and names. Who was president when you first became Speaker in 2007? George W. Bush, she answered. Correct. And who was vice president? There was a slight pause before she said, Dick Cheney. Yes, ma'am. Now, who was president when you became Speaker the second time in 2019? Donald Trump, she replied, and vice president. A longer pause occurred this time before she said, Mike Pence. Correct. Now, who is the current president of the United States? This should be instant, as everyone knew Trump had been inaugurated 2 days ago. Pelosi opened her mouth and said, President Biden. She caught herself and said Trump as President Trump was just inaugurated. You started to say Biden. President Biden served one term from 2021 to 2025. Then Trump won the election and was inaugurated Monday. You seem uncertain about that. I misspoke because it has been a transition period. Ma'am, it has been 2 days since the inauguration. If you are unclear on who the current president is, I must question your memory of events from 2020. One of the Democratic senators jumped in to say, This is absurd. Kennedy turned to him, saying with respect, This is not a casual conversation. Mrs. Pelosi is under oath testifying about financial decisions. If she cannot clearly remember who was president 2 days ago, how can we trust her memory of past stock trades? He turned back to Pelosi. Let me ask you who is the current Senate Majority Leader. Silence filled the room as Pelosi's face showed confusion. Ma'am, who leads the Senate right now? Is it McConnell? She asked, looking genuinely uncertain. It is Chuck Schumer, and has been since 2021. You have worked with him on major legislation. You guessed Mitch McConnell first, but he has not been Majority Leader in 4 years. Why would you think it was him? She had no answer. Kennedy let the silence hang. Mrs. Pelosi, are you feeling all right or do you need a break? I am fine, she insisted. Then let us continue, as Kennedy pulled out a thick document. These are your financial disclosure forms from 2019 to 2024. I want to ask you about specific trades. He flipped to a flagged page regarding March 15, 2020. Do you remember that date? I do not recall specific dates, she said. Let me help you remember. March 15, 2020 was a Sunday when the pandemic was declared a national emergency. The country was shutting down and the market had crashed. Do you remember that time period? Of course. On that Sunday, you and your husband purchased $5 million in call options for Pfizer stock. Do you remember that trade? Mrs. Pelosi, my husband manages our investments and I am not involved. But you signed the disclosure form. By law, you have to disclose any trade over $1,000. This was $5 million, and your signature is on the form." He held it up, and the cameras zoomed in. "Do you remember signing this?" She stared at it with no recognition. "I sign a lot of documents," she said. "This one disclosed the largest single trade you made all year. You do not remember signing it. I trust my staff to prepare accurate disclosures. So your staff knew about the trade, and you signed it without reviewing. I review everything, but I do not memorize. Then, do you remember the trade, yes or no?" "I remember my husband makes investments." "That is not what I asked." "Do you remember this specific trade of $5 million in Pfizer options?" "I do not recall the specific details," she admitted. Kennedy leaned forward to explain why that is a problem. The next day, the House voted on the CARES Act, including vaccine funding. You were Speaker and knew what was in the bill. The day before the vote, your family bet $5 million that Pfizer would see its stock increase. That is either the luckiest coincidence in history or it is insider trading. Insider. But you do not remember it. If you do not remember a $5 million trade, what else do you not remember? Pelosi's lawyers were whispering frantically. One leaned over, but Kennedy held up a hand. "Let her answer, please." The lawyer sat back. The trade was based on publicly available information, she stated. But you do not remember it. You cannot tell me why March 15th or why Pfizer. You just know it happened because your lawyer showed you the form. He pulled out another document. "Let us try another one from June 18th, 2021. Do you remember that date?" "No," she answered. "On June 18th, your husband purchased $2.5 million in Microsoft stock. 5 days later, the House passed a bill authorizing billions for semiconductor manufacturing. Microsoft stood to benefit enormously. Do you remember that trade?" "I do not remember every trade." "How about this one?" Kennedy asked relentlessly. "Now consider December 3rd, 2021. When your husband bought $3 million in Tesla call options. 2 weeks later, the House passed an expanded electric vehicle tax credit. This made Teslas more affordable and increased the stock price. Does that ring any bells? Senator, I do not coordinate my legislative work with my husband's investments. I am not asking if you coordinate. I am asking if you remember. These are multi-million-dollar trades happening right before major votes. You are telling me you do not remember any of them. My husband handles the investments. But you signed the disclosures. Your name is on these forms." Kennedy held up a stack of them showing dozens of trades. Kennedy pulled out his phone. "Let us talk about some statements you have made recently. Last month, on January 4th, you did an interview with CNN. Do you remember that interview?" "I do many interviews." "This was 3 weeks ago, and you were asked directly about stock trades." He tapped his phone, and a video played on the screen. Her own voice filled the room, stating she never used her position to benefit financially. Kennedy paused the video. "Do you stand by that statement?" "Yes." "Now, 3 days later, you did an interview with MSNBC. Let me show you that one." Another clip played where she admitted maybe they should have been more careful. Kennedy paused it. "Do you see the problem?" Pelosi looked confused and said she did not. "On January 4th, you said you never used your position to benefit. 3 days later, you said maybe you should have been more careful. Those are contradictory statements. Either you did something wrong or you did nothing wrong. Which is it?" "Those statements are not contradictory," she claimed. "Ma'am, they are 3 days apart. You gave 2 different answers to the same question. Why did you do that?" Pelosi opened her mouth and closed it, saying she was trying to explain nuance. "Let me show you more." Kennedy pulled out printed transcripts. "On January 10th, you told Fox News you do not recall the specific trades. Then on January 12th, you told Politico the trades were based on sound financial advice. So which is it? Silence followed. How can you defend trades as being based on sound advice if you do not recall them? Kennedy leaned back. Mrs. Pelosi, in the past month alone, you have given contradictory statements. I am genuinely concerned about your memory. Kennedy pulled out a bound document that was maybe 200 pages thick. 3 weeks ago, you were deposed as part of a civil lawsuit. You were deposed under oath for 4 hours. Do you remember that deposition? Yes. Good. Do you remember how many times you answered that you do not recall? You do not remember how many times you said you do not remember. Let me tell you that 76 times you claimed you did not remember. He opened the transcript to read. On page 23, you did not recall discussing the CARES Act. On page 47, you did not recall learning about the Pfizer purchase. On page 68, you did not recall signing the disclosure for Microsoft. On page 91, you did not recall attending a classified briefing. Kennedy looked up. Mrs. Pelosi, these are not trivial questions. These are major events and classified briefings. You do not remember any of it. Her lawyer jumped in to say, depositions are adversarial. I understand how depositions work, counselor. But there is a difference between being careful and having no memory. On page 47, you said your husband handles investments independently. But on page 103, you said you occasionally discuss economic trends. Those answers contradict each other. Pelosi looked flustered. I was trying to distinguish between specific trades and general conversations. But you cannot remember either. Kennedy's voice softened and was almost kind. Mrs. Pelosi, I am going to be direct with you. The American people deserve the truth. In the past month, you have given contradictory statements. You have been unable to remember basic facts. Today, you struggled to remember what year you became Speaker. I am concerned about your cognitive function. Have you been evaluated by a doctor for memory impairment? Her lawyer immediately objected that the question was inappropriate. It is directly relevant, Kennedy said firmly. If Mrs. Pelosi was making legislative decisions while experiencing cognitive decline, we have a right to know. If she was signing off on trades without awareness, that is relevant. He turned back to Pelosi. Ma'am, I am not trying to embarrass you. Either you made these trades knowingly, or you did not because you were not capable. Either way, you should not have been in leadership. So I will ask again if you have been evaluated. I am completely competent, Pelosi insisted. Then answer my questions. What was the date of the Pfizer trade? What year did you become Speaker the first time? She was searching again and could not find it. What did you have for breakfast this morning? She genuinely could not remember. What day of the week is it? Her lawyer whispered Thursday. Your lawyer just told you that. Did you know it before he told you? There was no answer. Mrs. Pelosi, what is today's date? She looked panicked now. Her lawyer whispered, January 22nd. January 22nd, she repeated. Kennedy sat back, looking genuinely sad. Mr. Chairman, I move that we request a formal cognitive evaluation. The Democratic senators erupted, calling it outrageous and ageist. But Kennedy was not backing down. This woman had access to our nation's most sensitive intelligence. She voted on authorizations for military force and controlled trillion-dollar budgets. She is sitting here unable to remember basic facts. If there is cognitive impairment, the American people have a right to know. A Republican senator added that the trades speak for themselves. Either she is lying or she is impaired. Another Republican noted that if she was impaired, someone else was using her position. That is fraud and corruption. The chairman tried to restore order. Mr. Chairman Kennedy said, "I am not attacking Mrs. Pelosi. I am trying to get to the truth. The truth is that she cannot answer basic questions. She cannot remember her own statements. That is observable fact." He turned back to Pelosi. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you one more time. Do you remember making these stock trades? Do you remember the classified briefings?" Her hands were shaking visibly. "Do you know where you are right now?" She looked up at him, and for a moment there was clarity. In that flash, she knew it was over. But then the blankness returned. "I am in the Senate," she said quietly. "Do you know why you are here?" "Stock trading," she said. "Do you remember the trades?" Her chief of staff rushed forward to whisper in her ear. Pelosi stood suddenly. "I do not have to sit here and be attacked with conspiracy theories. Ma'am, these are your financial disclosures and public records. I am just asking you to remember them." "I am done with this hearing," she declared. She was gathering her things and dropped her phone. The chairman stood saying she was under subpoena, but she was already moving supported by her lawyers. Kennedy called after her with his calm drawl. "Mrs. Pelosi, if you leave, we will refer this matter to the Department of Justice. We will also refer the question of your capacity to the Ethics Committee." She stopped at the door and turned. "Do what you have to do, Senator," she said. And she left. The door closed behind her. The cameras caught the confused look on her face. The hearing room erupted with reporters yelling questions. Kennedy sat calmly organizing his papers. The footage was everywhere within minutes. The devastating clips showed her inability to remember the year or the Senate leader. The most viral clip was Kennedy asking about the day of the week. That clip got 40 million views in 6 hours. Medical experts on cable news called it classic signs of impairment. The fact that she needed prompting suggested more than normal aging. Even Democrats started hedging their support. By Friday morning, Pelosi's office released a brief statement. She was taking a temporary leave for a medical evaluation. Translation meant they knew it was over. Monday, the Justice Department announced a formal investigation. If she was not competent, then someone else was making decisions. Paul Pelosi was subpoenaed and invoked his Fifth Amendment right. Wednesday, 3, House Democrats called for her resignation. If she is experiencing cognitive difficulties, she needs to focus on health. The polls came Friday and were devastating. 71% of voters believed she should resign. Most believed she engaged in insider trading. 10 days after the hearing, Nancy Pelosi announced her resignation. It was a written statement released on a Friday afternoon. She did not appear on camera. She cited health reasons and listed her accomplishments. She thanked the people of San Francisco. She did not mention the stock trades or the hearing. It was a dignified exit. 3 months later, the Justice Department charged Paul Pelosi with securities fraud. He pleaded guilty. Part of the deal was that Nancy would not be charged because she lacked criminal intent due to impairment. That was almost worse than being prosecuted. Paul got 18 months in federal prison. Nancy Pelosi disappeared from public life. Her Twitter account went silent. Occasionally, there were sightings of her looking frail. John Kennedy gave one interview to a local paper. He said he felt bad for her personally, but not for the intervention. It is not her fault that her memory failed. What is someone's fault is the system that kept her in power. Her staff and colleagues knew and kept her there because she was useful. I did it because the American people deserve to know. Whether the trades were her or her husband, the courts will sort out. You cannot serve in Congress if you cannot remember what Congress is voting on. Someone should have stopped it sooner. A year later, she was moved to a memory care facility. The family asked for privacy. In the end, it was a simple question that brought her down. What day of the week is it? She could not answer. Power demands competence. The moment you cannot provide that competence, power moves on. Pelosi's power had moved on, and she had been left behind.